Well, I have to say I'm very excited to be here, and I want to start by thanking my very good friend, Mary Burke, who you are so lucky to have as chairman of your Board of Trustees. I want to thank her fellow trustees. I want to thank President Mooney, and I certainly want to thank the Sisters of the Holy Cross, as well as the rest of the faculty and staff of St. Mary's College. I have to say, to look out at a sea of gorgeous women graduating from college is very humbling. And it's something that's also very exciting for me. And I stand here and I ask myself, how did I get here? How did I have this amazing opportunity to stand before you? And just by way of background, just some of the things not really represented in my bio, I'll tell you why it's very unlikely that I'm actually here giving this commencement address on such an important day in your lives. Well, first and foremost is when I was a kid, it was mentioned, I was the youngest of 6 kids, but I'm really young. So my oldest sister is more than 20 years older than me. So my family made a running joke of the fact that I wasn't planned. It's just one of those things that I've worked through now. And it was one of those things that they talked about quite a bit. But because I had 4 sisters and 1 brother, and of course my mother, I had 5 mothers. So I didn't have any kind of traditional sister relationship. I never got to sit in the front of the car. You know, all of those things that people get to do, I didn't get to do. When I was growing up, my mother was an entrepreneur. She was a single mom, and we were in a situation where money was always an issue for us. And when I was a kid, we used to get evicted, our phone would get disconnected, our lights would get turned off, and it was extraordinarily unstabilizing in some ways. But at the same time, I knew she was working extraordinarily hard and doing the best that she could. But as a child growing up, I was determined to have a different life. And I always tell people, I don't think it's an accident at all that I work in the financial services business. Because as a child, I was desperate to understand money. I mean, literally desperate. So I go to college at Princeton, which was an amazing opportunity. And between my sophomore and junior year, I discovered the world of investing because I was an intern at my firm, Ariel Investments. And like many people, I did not grow up in a home where the stock market was discussed in any way. And so I knew nothing about investing when I went there. And how would I? In most schools, notwithstanding the great finance program that you have here at St. Mary's College, at most schools, you don't learn about investing or anything about money. And it actually boggles the mind for me that in high school in America today, you can take woodshop or auto, but not a class on investing. So it always leads me to ask audiences a very simple question. Who here whittles in their spare time? Anyone cleaning their own carburetor? Right? But that auto class was really important. But you can't take a class about investing, again, in most schools in America, which is why it's become such a passion of mine. So I moved on to work at Ariel after I graduated from college, and it was the only job I've ever had. So unlike the statistics that say the average American has 11 jobs in their lifetime, I'm 43 years old, and I've had 1 job. It's the only thing I've ever done. And I have to tell you, which I think will be helpful to you as you go out and you start your careers, that first job is an important one. And I was determined, because I grew up, as I suggested to you before, without a lot of money, I did not want to get fired. So what I thought about all the time is my mother used to say to me, make yourself indispensable. And so that, to me, that meant you do anything, you know, that's legal, of course, but you do anything in terms of I get to the office first, I turn off the lights at the end of the day. There were a few times I actually slept under my desk. This is true. But all of it was back to this sense of financial insecurity, and I wanted to make sure no matter what, I had a job. So you might say that those early years really left a mark with me. There is no question about it. And at the same time, I would say they were tough, but I was very fortunate to have those experiences because they made me the person that I am today. I really do believe that. And while at the time I wouldn't have thought that I would love having those experiences, I look back on it and I think, thank God for those experiences because they made me this person that I am. So then I go on and I have this career, and I'm very fortunate to have this great job and great career and to be able to do some really wonderful things. But I'm here to tell you I made a lot of mistakes over this time. And that's what I wanted to spend the bulk of my time talking about with you, is the things that people just don't tell you, the things that go wrong, the times that you just really fall flat. And you know, you look at a resume or you have a commencement speaker and you look at the person and you say, she must have it all together. Well, no one does. And one of the ways that I wanted to explain some of my views and talk to you about what I've learned, which is really a conversation about the lessons that I've learned along the way, is I wanted to use a few quotes, just 4, to frame a quick discussion, and with each quote give you the lesson that I think I learned. Now, the first one is a quote that I read in, and it's a good thing I'm at a women's college, Cosmopolitan magazine. I know, very highbrow for a commencement address, right? But the quote was from this woman named Judy Collins, and none of you know who she is, and I barely do, but she was this really important singer in the 1960s and 70s. So Judy Collins has this quote, and it's extraordinarily important, and I read it and it spoke to me. And she said, "As women, we are raised to have rescue fantasies, and I'm here to tell you, no one is coming." Okay, I read this quote and I stopped dead in my tracks. No one is coming. This is completely counter to everything we've been taught, every fairy tale we've ever read. Snow White gets rescued, Rapunzel gets rescued, even Shrek rescued Fiona, right? But she says in the quote, no one is coming. So I read that quote and I thought to myself, I was about your age, and it made a huge difference for me because I said, what if I lived my entire life as if no one's coming? How will I take responsibility for myself in a very different way than I ever thought about taking responsibility before? And I thought to myself, this is in many ways a great quote to read when I'm 22 years old, because I think it will shape the rest of my life. No one is coming. Now, in many ways, it was not necessarily a fact, because we know people do come along. The white knight can come. Although I've learned from watching a lot of Friends, sometimes he only does a drive-by. And I also know it, just like in my business, the investment business, when we send out investment results, we say past performance is not a guarantee of future results. So these are things you just want to keep in mind, because sometimes he just kind of just stays for a little bit. But this idea of no one is coming, how am I going to own my life differently? I am going to be responsible for me, and I'm going to think about things in a very different way. So it made me, reading that quote, just reinforce all this independence that I always felt. Now, it came to me naturally, I have to say, because my mother was the single mom, and I gave you the sense of her, but she was very no-nonsense. And, a lot of you may know what I'm talking about, but I had the kind of mother that when I was 5 years old, I went up to her and I said, I can't wait for Santa to come. And she said, there is no Santa. Mommy is Santa. What are you talking about? I was like, I'm 5. Could I just have Santa just for a little bit? But she was always very practical, very matter of fact, and she wanted you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. Now, the great thing about that is, again, as I suggested, very independent. And I know you, being trained here at St. Mary's, you are independent women. But here's the lesson that I learned. Independence can be extraordinarily liberating, but it can also be really scary. And the one thing about independence, which I learned a very hard way when I was working in my earliest time of my career, is it meant that if I asked someone for help, I was weak. And that was the big learning. They told me there'd be a plane. That was the big learning where I had to stop and say, I'm not going to be able to make it on my own. For as strong and as independent as I feel, I'm going to have to ask for help. So I tell you, as women who've gone to a women's college that has been a sisterhood, there is going to be a need at some point, probably earlier rather than later, where you ask for help. And you are not surrendering your independence when you do so. That was lesson number 1. The next quote that I wanted to tell you about, I saw, again, in another magazine. It's Neil Simon, and he said, if no one ever took risks, Michelangelo would have painted the Sistine floor. Okay, so I read this quote and I started thinking, okay, well, that's kind of interesting, but it didn't quite move me until I went to Italy, and I learned how a fresco is made. So I don't know if you know anything about this. Michelangelo was asked by the Pope to paint the Sistine Chapel. And the first time he said, no, don't want to do it. I don't want to go up like 20 stories and lay on my back for a couple of years and paint. I'm not interested in doing it. Now, I didn't really understand the complexity of the problem that he was confronting when he said no. And you should know the Pope did not accept that answer. And he said, I'm the Pope, you're painting the ceiling. So he did the ceiling. But a fresco is not just some paint and a brush. A fresco is plaster first. And the plaster is skimmed across the surface, and you have to do everything while it's wet. So what happens is the individual during that time would have a thin piece of tissue paper with the sketch or the drawing on it. And they'd put it up against the surface, and they'd take tiny little pins, and they'd do the pins as the outline of the drawing in order to have the pins when the tissue paper came off. Then they'd have the colors. And the colors would be, for example, sky blue. If you were sky blue, your father was sky blue, and his father was sky blue, and you made a very specific shade of sky blue that was the exact same sky blue every single day, no matter what. And you'll understand why this is important in a minute. So he's on his back, he's many stories up, they're bringing up the paints, and the only time you know if it's done and if it's right is when it's dry. And if it's wrong, you chip it down and start over. So you can now understand why when Neil Simon says, if no one ever took risks, Michelangelo would have painted the Sistine floor, because it would have been much easier to do a floor, trust me. So I read that quote and I thought about it, and I said, you know, having been this independent woman, this idea of risk is something that, you know, I think I understand extraordinarily well. And my mother was in the real estate business, so I grew up with risk. I always thought I admired people who were risk takers, like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. When you think about it, Martin Luther King was sending children into very bad situations in order to liberate everyone. That was a huge, huge risk that could have gone wrong. So I thought about this fact that, yeah, I understand risk. I know what risk is. I know what that's like. And you think you have an idea of yourself, and this will be very important as well, until you're actually tested. When you're actually tested, you actually don't know what you are. So I thought of myself as being this very strong, independent woman who could do anything. And one day I went to the powers that be at ABC, and I told them, I said, I want to do a primetime special on investing. And they were like, that will be so boring. And I said, what I'd like to do, I'd like to have celebrities help me. They said, they'll never do it. And I said, what if I find them? And people will watch because they'll learn from people that they find very interesting and entertaining. They said, no one will ever do it. So I said, I will find the people. So single-handedly, I started off and I called everyone I knew, and the first person I got to was Will Smith. And he said, yes. So then I got to great people like the Jonas Brothers, and to Sam Jackson, and to Rosario Dawson and Christian Slater and all these people, and they all said yes. So you think this is going great, right? Then one day I'm sitting and I'm staring out into the abyss, and I am like, I have no idea what I am doing, and these people have actually said yes. This is horrible. And again, you think you're this, you know, tough cookie who can get it done. So I have a panic attack, just complete and total panic. I know I don't seem like that on TV, but I did. So I have this panic attack, and someone who's really smart looks over at me and they say, here's the thing, you might fail miserably. And you know what's gonna happen? The next day you're gonna wake up and life is gonna go on, because it always does. And the thing is, you won't know unless you try. So I'd rather try and fail and get up the next morning and life will go on than to not do anything at all. So that was the lesson of the Michelangelo, in terms of the floor would have been easier to do. It would have been easier for me to do nothing at all and not feel all that anxiety, but it was actually the right thing to do. That takes me to my next quote. Winston Churchill, he said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Hell is not real estate you want to occupy for long, trust me. No, here's the thing. You're type A personality, you're very driven, you're these strong, independent women. And the unfortunate thing about life is that something will challenge you in a way that you never expected to before. It is inevitable. It is going to happen. And it's not because you're a good person or a bad person or anything like that. Bad things happen, no matter, despite the best efforts. And it could be someone you care about getting sick or dying or divorce or all sorts of things. And for me, I was 40 years old, and it was the financial crisis of 2008. And everything that I thought I believed and knew, and all the work I had done to push this huge rock up a hill, the rock rolled down and nearly killed me on the way down, because the financial markets just fell apart. And this was a time where I had such a tough time emotionally thinking about what could I have done differently. And this is what I learned about when you're in hell, keep going. Sometimes there is nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to help the situation, and you just have to accept it, which is extraordinarily hard. But it is one of those defining moments that happens in life. I had a friend who once told me he collected Bordeaux wine, and he said the best wine is grown in the toughest soil. If it has to break through rocks and leaves and trees, it ends up yielding the best grapes. And I used that to get through that tough period, saying, I'm just going to be great wine. I'm growing through these awful rocks and soil, and it'll all work out in the end. Another friend said to me, he said, you know, Mellody, you're from Chicago. You understand something better than anyone else. I said, what is that? He says, what do you have in Chicago that most people don't have? I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, you have blizzards and snowstorms. And he said, what do you know about a snowstorm? If you want to go from point A to point B, you watch your feet. You never look up at the storm, ever. Because if you look up at the storm, you fall. So all you're doing is watching your feet, trying to get from one place to the other. And very small steps are a victory. So that was the lesson I learned during that period. So last but not least, which I think you know intuitively, and Teddy Roosevelt said it, do what you can, where you are, with what you've got. The number of people that I meet who tell me why they are not acting, why they are bystanders in society, because they're waiting for something to happen. They're waiting to have more money. They're waiting to have more time. They're waiting for something instead of doing something is unacceptable. And we have a saying at my firm where we talk about the problems of the world and we say, we have admired the problem long enough. What will we do to fix it? So I'm going to implore upon you not to admire the problem. I know you've been taught to do and to act, but doing what you can, where you are, with what you've got, if it's $5 or 5 cents, that will actually move the needle in the society that we live in. And that's something that I think is a lesson that we can all remember time and time again. So, my story is that I'm 43 years old. I'm not counting on being rescued. I'm trying desperately to paint my own Sistine Chapel. When I'm in hell, I do keep going. And I'm idealistic enough to believe that I can actually make the world a better place. And the question that I ask you graduates is, what will your story be? And it's important for you to know it will be driven 100% by your intention. That doesn't mean that random things won't happen, but you will actually have the life that you want. You have to just decide what that life is. And so I encourage you to go get it and just know that I will be rooting for you every single day. Thank you.